that there were people in every college and in our campuses doing something in water. And like a lot of things that we do well in the university world, we kind of put our head down, we focus on our thing. And so these people that had a passion for water didn't know that each other existed and that collaborations could exist.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of food systems. It's produced by the Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab at Kansas State University. Welcome back to our hosts, Dr. Marina Lovnik, known for her leadership at the American Institute of Baking International, and more recently as coordinator of global food systems at Kansas State University. Dr. Jim Stack, professor of agronomy and director of the Great Plains Diagnostic Network at Kansas State University. And Dr. Brian McCormick, professor and department head for entomology and a co-director of the Institute for Digital Agriculture and Advanced Analytics at Kansas State University. Water, the essence of life itself, stands as our most indispensable resource, yet often goes unappreciated. Water scarcity and sustainability pose formidable hurdles with far-reaching implications for communities, economies, and ecosystems. To navigate these challenges effectively, innovative research endeavors, advancements in agricultural technology, and collaborative partnerships across academic, governmental, and community sectors become imperative. In this episode of Something to Chew On, we highlight the work of Dr. Susan Metzger, Director of Strategic Interdisciplinary Program Development at Kansas State University, the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment, known as KCARE, the Kansas Water Institute, and the Institute for Digital Agriculture and Advanced Analytics, known as ID3A, with emphasis on engagement. At the intersection of water resource management, agricultural productivity, and interdisciplinary academic research, Dr. Metzger offers evidence-based solutions for confronting the toughest water challenges of our time.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Susan Metzger to Something to Chew On today. Dr. Metzger is director of both KCARE and the Kansas Water Institute, as well as being director of strategic interdisciplinary programs with the Agricultural Extension in the College of Agriculture at K-State. Welcome, Susan. Can you give us a little background starting out here on yourself, who you are, how you came to the area of study that you are in, and how you ended up at K-State?
Great. Well, thank you, Maureen. Thanks to everybody for having me here today, and looking forward to the discussion. So I'm not a Kansas native, so I'll kind of back up and maybe say what got me to Kansas in the first place. So I grew up in a military family. We moved all around, and then my dad retired in the D.C. area, so I went to college and grad schools in Virginia and was working for an engineering firm in Virginia and went to a training at Virginia Tech, and a really handsome man from Council Grove, Kansas, went to the same training. So made my way to Kansas when we got married. And so I've been here now for 20 years, which is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. So count Kansas as home, and hope Kansas has adopted me, not quite as a native. But all of my schooling and background was in natural resources, undergrad in botany and a master's in wetland sciences. So when I moved to Kansas, I knew I wanted to work in the public sector. I had been in the private sector for my career up till then. And so I literally looked for Kansas water jobs and landed at the Kansas Water Office as my first job here in Kansas. And so since I've been here, I've been working on water resource projects and quite a bit in the intersection with food and ag production since then. And joined K-State about 5 years ago.
Great. Thank you. Perhaps we can start off with giving us a little background on what is KCARE and what is the Kansas Water Institute, and how do you fit into those programs?
Great. I'd be glad to share that. So there really are two separate things. So we'll start with KCARE, the Kansas Center for Ag Resources and the Environment. And so KCARE helps to direct research, teaching, and engagement related to the intersection of natural resources and food and ag production. So it's more than water, but focused on agriculture. And so that's kind of a separation from the Kansas Water Institute, which focuses just on water, but more than agriculture. It's kind of how I distinguish the two of them. And we've had KCARE here for about 20 years. It's unique. There isn't another institution or state that has something similar to KCARE at their university. But every state and territory has something comparable to the Kansas Water Institute. So under the 1964 Water Resources Act, every state or territory has a designation of a water institute that's helping direct research towards the state's highest priority water resource concerns. So ours has been housed at K-State since the act was established, but kind of a best-kept secret. So this past fall, we had the opportunity to really bring that institute to a university level, make it really interdisciplinary, and draw statewide attention to the work of the institute.
Well, I'll jump in. So following up on that, really, with respect to water challenges in the state, a lot of attention is focused on western Kansas and the Ogallala Aquifer and the predicted negative impacts on sustainable agriculture. So a general question is, how are we doing in eastern Kansas? And there's a tremendous amount of development along the I-35 Kansas City to Emporia corridor, and just curious what the perspective is on water in eastern Kansas.
Absolutely. Yeah, great point, Jim. I always think it's so interesting. Kansas water resources are so diverse. So western Kansas fed by groundwater, eastern Kansas fed by surface water, 15 inches of precipitation on the Colorado border, 46 inches of precipitation on the Missouri border, so diverse. And so when we think about eastern Kansas, our challenges with the surface water, we're dependent on federal reservoirs for reliable water storage and flood control, but because they're not natural impoundments, they're plagued by sediment and nutrient inputs. And so we know if we did nothing else in the next 50 years, we will have lost about 40% of that storage in those reservoirs to sedimentation. Routinely now, every summer sees blue-green algae blooms at those reservoirs, which has major implications for reliable quantity and improved drinking water quality. Only exacerbated as we have greater dependence on that supply going into the future. So when we look at the most drought-vulnerable watersheds in eastern Kansas, that includes the corridor that you described in the Meredazine Basin. So 5 of the 7 river basins in eastern Kansas would not have sufficient supplies during an extended drought. We see that in communities like Caney in southeast Kansas even today. So it means doing more to reduce the sedimentation, future inputs, restoring supply in those areas, and then the role of conservation of reducing our demand.
Yeah, big challenge.
Absolutely.
If I could, just one follow-up on that. So everyone in Kansas is impacted by the water challenge and by water policies. Kansas is home to tribal lands of 4 federally recognized tribes. How engaged are they in addressing the water challenges and planning for the future?
Absolutely. So most people don't really think of Kansas and our tribal influence, especially when it relates to water resources. Our neighbors to the south in Oklahoma, it's more of their day-to-day thinking when it comes to water policy, but certainly significant in Kansas. So a great example of that several years ago. So any federal institute in the state, so you think of Fort Riley, any Native American has the most senior water rights or access to water in the state predates even statehood for us, for their priority of access to that water. And so when you think of our Water Appropriation Act coming in, and you have irrigation, and you have communities also depending on that water that have a water right, it sets up an opportunity for conflict. And so about 10 years ago, we actually, the state was entered into a lawsuit for not protecting that tribal water right. And it allowed us an opportunity to negotiate a better outcome than always relying on the court system for that. And so with that, we set up a whole new way of making sure that the tribe not only had water for today, but they had a plan to grow if they wanted to. And then how that balanced with administering the water rights that we know under the Water Appropriation Act. So while we maybe not as day-to-day in our thinking with water policy like it is in some of our other states, we are learning to navigate those what's called the winter doctrine rights in the state.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So what came to mind when we were talking about eastern Kansas and water availability, it got me a little bit nervous and worried. Maybe that wasn't the intent, but as you think about listeners that maybe have heard those stats for the first time, what are some of like you consider like the top 2 or 3 kind of action items about like what should they do with that information? How should they maybe think about their interactions with not only water, but also policy and other things that are kind of happening around this space?
Yeah. It is surprising because most people, your knowledge of your water resources is turning on your tap in the morning. It's never in question, especially if you live in a town like Manhattan. So there's always a personal responsibility, of not being wasteful and doing the most that you can in your home and your lawn and things like that. The most impactful things, I think, are really in the planning for communities. So we have lots of examples, and maybe you're familiar of them too, of small communities throughout the state that when they consolidate their school districts, how contentious that is for them. You're navigating who plays basketball against the other teams and, where your kids are going to school. The same thing happens with water resources. So as our communities grew throughout the state, they had their own independent water supply and water treatments. But as we grow and communities merge, and you also have smaller and smaller populations in these rural areas, we need policy and financial support that encourages those communities to share the resources, especially in times of shortages, and then also sharing the treatment of that water. It's expensive to treat water. The requirements for treating water become more and more robust, and having that financial burden on a smaller and smaller population is prohibitive. So the more we can do to encourage communities coming together to share a resource and to share their treatment and having policy that supports that, I think is really important. And if we can build on some lessons learned for when we consolidated school districts and how you approach those community conversations, I think it could help us with water.
With some of the development that's going on, as it's typical everywhere with development, you have a strong core, and then it kind of bleeds out. What's the groundwater situation in eastern Kansas for those that aren't close to a municipal source?
Right. So most people do think of groundwater being a western Kansas thing, but we do have groundwater sources in eastern Kansas. So the glacial deposits in far northeast Kansas are a portion of groundwater dependency. So you have some communities dependent on that. And then the other places we see groundwater is mostly what we call alluvial systems. So the areas immediately adjacent to a river corridor. So it's actually dependent on the surface flow, but it is a groundwater supply. So I would, again, it's part of the planning. And for eastern Kansas, that planning of a groundwater source often falls to a rural water district of knowing what their connectivity is to that and planning their supply, and also then planning the growth in a community.
I'm not sure how to formulate the question that I've got in my mind. What I'm thinking about is the challenges with agricultural runoff and pollution of the water systems that we do have, and looking at things like the Kansas River. I live outside of town, and we drive by it every day, and you can walk across it now. At this point in time, there's very little water in there, but we do know, too, that we've got a lot of runoff. And we're trying to also increase the population in the state. I mean, one of the things I focused on when I was at the university was trying to figure out ways of bringing more people into the central and western parts of the state. I see this as kind of a push-me-pull-you on how you manage and deal with water-related issues when there's not a lot of it out there. We do have issues with contamination. How do we focus on those challenges?
Absolutely. It is that push-me-pullio. That's a great way of describing it. So kind of at first just thinking about the difference of point and non-point source challenges with water quality and what that means to a growing population. So if all of us lived in a city, I think it'd be easier to address our water quality concerns because that's a point source, where you bring your water in, where you discharge your water can be, think of it going to a direct pipe. So you can work on what comes out or into that pipe. The bigger challenge that we have as a state is most of our land is privately owned. A lot of agricultural production, it's an important part of our state's economy. But when you have that, when you have not even what we do today, but our entire history of growth of cattle and crops in the state has nutrient runoff implications. And that's the harder thing to address. It's not finding out a pipe that you're going to improve the water quality there. Is thinking about your entire landscape and how you address water quality runoff there. So that's a lot of the work that KCARE does, is working with producers to help them implement practices that would reduce the runoff and then improve the quality of the runoff when it does occur. But that's sort of the bugaboo of what we have a challenge for in the state. Big state, big ag production, and not just thinking about our practices today, but the nutrients that are on the ground have been there sometimes for 50 plus, 100 plus years, and that's what we're working to address.
So, Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment, what are the non-water resources that you pay attention to?
Absolutely. So you think of soil health and soil quality, you think of air quality, air pollution, climate-related impacts, carbon sequestration. That's sort of just maybe a run on of a couple of the other types of projects that we help work with through KCARE. In the state right now, a big focus on soil health. So not just the soil's ability to retain water, but its ability to retain nutrients, to actually mitigate carbon and greenhouse gas sequestration. So those are some of the areas that, as we work with producers, that we may not talk to them about carbon sequestration, but we talk to them about their overall soil health and production and what it means for their productivity, but also we know it has the environmental benefits as well.
So are these KCARE and the Water Institute, are they funding projects or do they just coordinate projects?
Sure, a little bit of both. So KCARE's primary source of funding is through the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. And so that helps fund watershed specialists throughout the state. They're the actual boots on the ground working with producers. But then it also provides funding for best management practices that those producers would put on the ground. So we basically take those dollars in, put them on to the ground. And the Kansas Water Institute receives its funding from the U.S. Geological Survey and, again, turns that around to research projects, not just at K-State, sometimes at KU or Fort Hays State University. We partner with the other Regents institutions in the states. And with the elevation of the Kansas Water Institute to a university-wide institute, we're also then expanding it. While it's always been research to date, now it's research, teaching, and engagement. So thinking about our curriculum and the way that we engage with even more than just agricultural producers in the state. And we're hoping, because it's always been a pass-through of our funds from the U.S. Geological Survey, with a request for funding from the Kansas legislature, actually fully staffing it, and making it as robust as the institutes you see in Oklahoma, Colorado, and Texas.
Yeah, thank you. I too have been at K-State for 20 years, and I just learned more about this than I in the past 20 years.
Yeah. I think
there's more. There's more.
That's the goal. I mean, and maybe that's the Midwest thing. We do a lot of things as the best kept secret. We just do the service, do the work. But this is a chance to elevate it to something pretty special.
And a more recent elevation in my mind was you had a kind of like an internal stakeholder gathering, it was like, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, maybe talk a little bit about that, where there's 70 plus people talking about water, right?
Absolutely. So I knew from the work I was doing in KCARE and the Water Institute that there were people in every college and in our campuses doing something in water. And like a lot of things that we do well in the university world, we kind of put our head down, we focus on our thing. And so these people that had a passion for water didn't know that each other existed and that collaborations could exist. And so prior to the launch of our university strategic plan, just convened a group, and it happened to be 75 because that was the capacity for the room, but I know I probably could have doubled that capacity. And so I went through CAIUs, I went through web pages, and if somebody did something in water, I invited them to come to that event. And we just, it was a facilitated workshop where we talked about what you do already, what you would like to do, and the big problems that you'd like to address. And probably the most exciting thing coming out of that, or people were engaged and excited, and they met somebody in that room that they want to work with that they didn't even know existed on campus.
I was going to ask you, based on the funding from the Geological Survey, the obvious answer is going to be yes, but how much overlap do you have with geology here on campus? How much interdisciplinary work is going on there?
Yeah, quite a bit. For our K-State faculty, the Water Institute funding we receive from USGS has gone to a number of things, not just within the College of Agriculture. Bio and Ag Engineering receives funding. In the past, Dr. Tricia Moore has done some work in the city of Wichita and the watershed above that on atrazine runoff and blue-green algae issues. And then oftentimes our geology work is in partnership with the Kansas Geological Survey, which is housed at the University of Kansas, but we work so cooperatively with them, working on things like the alluvial aquifer in the Kansas River Basin or Western Kansas groundwater issues. They did some work with funding from the U.S. Geological Survey looking at nitrate issues in the Equus Walnut Basin, which is around the Wichita area as well. So quite a bit of overlap, and I think that's really a key thing of the Water Institute and thinking about how we tackle water issues. You're not going to reduce sedimentation in a reservoir or conserve and extend the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer with an engineered solution, with a biological solution. It all has to take an interdisciplinary approach, and the key part of that is a social solution. And we often don't think of bringing the social sciences into a scientific challenge, but it's key for addressing our water resource concerns.
Such an important point.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more.
It seems like so KCARE, Water Institute, your interdisciplinary title, and the president's VP's office. And then, yet, if you can believe it, there's one more.
Yes.
There's one more title to add to all of this.
I missed one at the beginning.
There's one,
I apologize.
No, that's okay. But I think it's also, again, it's board of director, one of the board of directors for the Institute for Digital Agriculture and Advanced Analytics.
Yes.
And I guess I'm kind of curious on how you see that all fitting in. I see it. I'm super excited to be working with you and the rest of the team on that. I see really great connections with water. Maybe talk a little bit about how you're envisioning those partnerships kind of unfolding. Absolutely.
So I do see a really strong connection between the two. So, and also one of the exciting things that came out of the strategic plan and a bigger focus on interdisciplinary program development at K-State was the Institute for Digital Ag and Advanced Analytics. And so, again, we had expertise across campus that were doing something in digital agriculture, computer science, machine learning, big data that had value to food and ag production in the state, and how can we bring those disciplines together in a more impactful way? And that's what the Institute does. And so really excited to be a part of it. It's humbling to be a part of it because these are brilliant minds around the table.
Most of them.
Most of them.
But speaking of myself,
I'll leave. I'll go.
Speaking of myself, Stack, don't look at me like that. Yeah.
So when we think then about, well, then what are the challenges that an Institute for Digital Ag and Advanced Analytics is trying to address, for sustainable food and ag production? Water is a key part of that. And so I'm really excited to see where there's the chance for the interface. We know that there in the world of precision ag and irrigation and all that. There's the technology on the ground that's addressing water resources. And then this overwhelming amount of data that's being generated from it that we do not make good use of for good decision making. But our institute can really help think of how do you help people use the data to change their behavior.
Yep, see the value.
Yeah, absolutely.
To follow up on the decision-making part about this, so policy provides the framework for decision-making. So if you don't it basically steers decisions in a specific direction. Yeah. So if you don't get the policy right, you end up in a bad place. So how are we doing on policy in the state? What are the maybe the gaps that need to be plugged for water policy?
Sure. I think it's something Kansas does really well, of sort of this looped system of information, of a problem on the ground, a potential solution that informs a policy, then you try it out and you kind of shift it over time. So, and sometimes I think, gosh, we're going so slow and the challenges are so big, but then I hear from our neighboring states the envy we are to them for the policies that we have in place to actually create change. So starting with just the very foundation that we have a very solid Water Appropriation Act in Kansas, require annual water use reports from every water right in the state, and that more and more every year have a required meter on each of those water rights. It sounds so fundamental to have that in place, but other states do not. So that's the basis of it. So some great policies that I've seen in my time here at Kansas. So locals had said, I want to have a legal framework for holding my neighbors accountable to reducing water use in a particular area. And I need it to be local. I don't want the state administering that. We've always had this intensive groundwater use control area. Chief engineer can tell you, you've got to use less water, and here's how you do it. The locals wanted something that they could drive. And so it created the local enhanced management areas, or a LEMA tool. And Sheridan County was the first ones to put it in place. It's been in place for more than 10 years. Collectively in 100 square miles, they said, we're going to reduce our water use by 20%. We're all required to do that. And the beautiful thing over that time, they've exceeded it every time, typically reduce their water use about 30%. And they're all more profitable in that 100 square miles than they are outside of that 100 square miles. So now that tool has been adopted for all of Northwest Kansas and for West Central Kansas. And then so you try that out and people say, well, that worked out pretty good. What if I'm just an individual water right owner and want to have a conservation plan, and I'd like to get some credit for that and some flexibilities? So they said, legislature figure that out. And so we created Water Conservation Acts, which allows an individual to do the same thing you could do in a larger LEMA. So now we have probably in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 water conservation areas. And so now I think we're at the point, all right, I'm always of a do better mindset, So now I want to know, what is the next thing that's out there?
So we've been talking a lot about water.
My favorite topic.
I know, and I want to know why. So I'm an entomologist because it fit my schedule. I mean, it was one of those things but it was really a teacher, right, that kind of helped me see the beauty in insects and the connection to agriculture. But I'm kind of went back to you said a master's in wetland sciences.
Yes.
Maybe tell me how you got to that point. Where's the water connection for you?
Yeah. So I'll start even before then. So I thought I was going to go into sports medicine. I was going to work for a hockey team, and I was going to, fix broken bones. That was what I was going to do. And
You're real close to that right now.
I'm so close to that. Yes. There's not a hockey team anywhere near us. And, so as I was choosing undergraduate schools, my dad said, I think it's most important that, you'll get a biology degree anywhere you go. That's fine. And if you do it well, you can go on to med school. He said, but choose something that's going to teach you to read, write, and communicate. So I selected a liberal arts school and so glad I did, because in my first semester there, I was taking my cell biology and blah, 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 blah. And I took a botany class because it fit in my schedule. And then I was like, wait a second, I like plants more than people. I know, Jim, you can relate. So
I'm sitting right here, Jim. Yeah,
Not taking it personally, though.
right,
No.
not at all.
yeah. So that botany class opened me up to just more general kind of ecology classes, and I realized I really liked thinking of systems approaches to natural resources, and then water was always the common theme that I was most intrigued about throughout those classes. In my last year of undergrad, I took a wetland science class, and then I was like, that's what I want to do. So found a school at Old Dominion that actually had a degree in wetland sciences. And I think also more than water, what I liked about wetland sciences in that degree is it also is interdisciplinary. It's the plants, it's the hydrology, it's the soil. Yep. And then so water's always been there.
So one of the things that I was reading through that you're involved in is overlap with the K-State Plan for Economic Prosperity.
Absolutely.
And some of the internal focuses on infrastructure at the university. Where do these programs fit into that? What's the vision within the university?
Sure. So first I'll just kind of talk about economic prosperity and its tie to natural resources and my work in general, especially when I think of, the work in Western Kansas. When you're working with a producer, trying to think of how you drive down water use, but you're still productive. If it doesn't make economic sense, then it's not going to happen. If you could remove economics, I think we'd all just decide, sure, we'll use less, we'll have less inputs, and we'll use less water, and I'll accept a lower yield or whatever that might be. It's not the case. Economics always has to be at the heart of it. And so I think that's important to the work that I do in water. And then when you think of that from the university perspective, statewide, the Board of Regents recognized the universities really have a role in driving economic prosperity for the state, not just by growing the minds that become the workforce, but especially as a land-grant institution, an obligation of making sure that communities are healthy. And part of a community health is that economic prosperity. And you talked about, how you get people attracted to move to the state. Our population is in a steady decline. Only a few counties in the state that actually are growing in population. And we need to rethink the way that a community looks in Kansas, and not just what might attract a person to come here and have a job. Maybe that's working at a sunflower crushing plant in Northwest Kansas, but they're coming with their family. And so how do you have family-sustaining economic prosperity requires us to diversify the jobs that occur in the state. And I think K-State, in the way that we deliver our science, that we deliver our extension programming, can help that.
If I could maybe drill a little deeper on that, because that's curious about strategic interdisciplinary program development, kind of what that actually meant. But so this first a philosophical question. What do you see as the primary purpose of a university? Is it scholarship, education, or job training?
Can I say all those things? If we weren't a land-grant institution, then maybe you focused it in, and maybe your goal is generating the best science, that you're a premier research institution. I think of where I went to undergrad, and I think their primary focus really was in the education component, not heavily research-driven. But K-State's all of those things with our land-grant mission. We have some of the best scientists in the world driving research. We have, to me, the best student experience that you could get anywhere in the state and even outside the state. So that obligation of having affordable access for any student that wants to grow their minds to get a great job or make an impact in their community. But that third part, the extension part that makes us so unique as an institution, to me is what's most exciting and kind of what leads my thinking when I approach my work every day. So my work has some research, it has some teaching components, but it's the outreach and engagement part that really leads my thinking. And I hope it leads the thinking for K-State entirely.
So the practical question is, so how does that work? The strategic interdisciplinary program development, what's the mission of that entity?
Absolutely. So it's really, as we think of the challenges called for us in our next gen strategic plan, to me that interdisciplinary program development is helping people think of their work differently. So helping create meaningful connections across disciplines, so people might think of grant proposals together or shared course loads together. So part of my work is creating the collision of people that allows us to think of our work differently. And also a key part of it is, with the Next Gen Strategic Plan, is it doesn't matter, no longer is it that you have an extension appointment. You know, in our world, we think if you have extension tenths as part of your assignment, that's not where engagement lives. It sure will continue being part of our extension mission, but helping everybody on campus see that they have a role in engagement and outreach, that extends beyond the boundaries of our main campus here throughout the state, that we're actually helping make a difference throughout the state.
So how do faculty reach out to get engaged with that?
Absolutely. So I welcome anybody just to contact me directly. I love having those conversations. One of the things I'm intentionally doing, I'll start the new year by meeting with each of the deans of the colleges throughout campus, and then also Olathe and Salina, and starting with some basic questions. What do you think are the interdisciplinary programs that you already excel at? And that might look different depending on the college. So I would even think within our own College of Agriculture, interdisciplinary things might mean entomology partnering with agronomy, you know? So we'll start with that. What do you already do well? What are the things that you think you have the potential to grow in interdisciplinary space? And then the third part, the most important thing that I think I help bring to solutions is what keeps you from doing interdisciplinary work. Is it promotion and tenure? Is it just that the opportunity of putting people together and imagining their work differently? How can I help you overcome those things so that we do interdisciplinary work and it's not as hard as it seems?
Yeah, it's a great challenge. I'll expect my colleague here to correct me on this. But no, some of the challenges that we have that you would be addressing require a longer-term vision of your own research program. But to get tenure, you can't afford to do that.
Exactly.
And so by the time you get tenure, your program is so well developed that you don't stray from it. And so the system itself is not really conducive to get to accomplishing that mission. So that's probably one of the things that we as a university need to figure out how to address, how to encourage that creativity to address more broadly some of these issues when in fact they're not going to get tenure if they do that.
Right.
So we have to address that.
It is the challenge, but also the incentive of it too. More and more, the largest federal grants that you can think of being competitive for really require an interdisciplinary team. And so if you can help people create the teams, hopefully they see that they become more competitive for those large grants that do help then come back to promotion and tenure. And then I think to attract the best faculty to K-State in the future, if we can solve those challenges of promotion and tenure and how you're acknowledged in literature and things like that in an interdisciplinary way, what a great place it would be to come work if other faculty throughout the nation saw that K-State got it right.
It's definitely a mindset and culture shift.
It is.
I don't think it's too big of a leap, though, for K-State, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the biggest things that's kept me here is our collaborative spirit.
I thought it was me.
And
Don't interrupt. And the primary reason is Dr. Jim Stack. Because let's be honest, we'd all leave if he left.
That's why we stay. That's why we stay. Yes.
No, but I mean, in all honesty, it is. It's the.
Don't worry, that part will be cut out.
Yeah. Or not.
Or not. Yeah, come on. We're changing things a little bit here, Jim. No, it is that kind of mindset shift, and I would say, my experience with more junior faculty is they are impressionable, have a lot of great ideas that are truly more kind of interdisciplinary because that's kind of some of their training that they kind of came into. But then we need to provide them a system that allows them that same kind of flexibility. And I'd say some of that challenge is just getting those that have been here before. These strategic. There's always a strategic plan, but it's the strategic doing with that plan I think is really the most critical. And I'm excited about with this K-State 105, and if just so you know, I'm one of I'm the ambassador for the engagement group that's working with Tim Steffensmeyer and a bunch of others, and we're just kind of figuring that out. But to me, it's exciting when you thought about kind of the more research interdisciplinary, but then what does that really mean to communities? What does that really mean to bring in jobs here? What does that really mean to working with maybe the legislators and saying, hey, we need some funding to be able to get this off the ground because, they want to bring honey certification to Kansas. And they're going, wait a minute, where'd that all come? Like, how'd that all happen? But you're just kind of open to the idea of having a conversation around something that, is very entomological, like honey production. But what does that look like? When we now talk about water, we talk about digital ag and advanced analytics. When we talk about, potential with, where does pathology fit into all that? Well, diseases and bugs is kind of a problem when you're talking about colony collapse. And so I think the interdisciplinary part and just as elevating that and saying we're going to value it, and not only that, we're going to put somebody who does a really awesome job at bringing people together. I'm talking about our guests. I don't know if you do. I mean, I didn't want to be.
Don't worry, I wasn't confused.
I wanted to be very clear. I wasn't talking about you, Dr. Stack. But it's one of those where I think it's okay to have. In my opinion, it's okay to have some titles that we haven't quite figured out yet. Even ID3A and the Water Institute, because at the end of the day, there needs to be a bigger vision. But if we don't put a stamp and say, we're starting here and give people a chance to kind of see themselves in it and move it forward, then I'd say we're still going to have problems with water in eastern Kansas and western Kansas. We're not going to have the resources we need to make sure that, food producers are profitable. I agree. The economic piece is important. So to me, that's all exciting, but it's that mindset shift. And the culture thing, I think we'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting that universities, academic institutions are known for innovation and creativity, yet we haven't solved this in probably 60 years.
No. Yeah.
We're stuck in kind of that tenure rut, and it really is quite irrational.
What an opportunity, though. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the grants and things like that, and we've kind of $1 million grant used to sound like a lot of money.
I know.
It's just not a lot of money,
right,
at all. Not from the scientist's perspective when you consider that almost half of that disappears before you ever see the money.
Yeah.
And then in order to get $1 million grant, it almost has to be multidisciplinary. So that means sharing what's left. And when you get down to it, there's just not you can't get a lot done. So
right.
I'm wondering what's the engagement to bring industry into this discussion and accept some responsibility for funding the research that they all benefit from?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a huge part of it. And I think it's something, just using the Institute for Digital Ag and Advanced Analytics as an example, a large part of some of our preliminary work is thinking strategically about those industry partners that we would want to bring into projects. Not long after the launch of the Institute, you've got inquiries from all sorts of industry partners, but thinking of what are the ones that align best with the goals of the Institute, and how do then we really grow those partnerships. And then how does that translate into dollars? That's key Because we also know, in my experience, you do the same amount of work on $1 million project as you do on a $10 million project. And so it needs to be something that's a valuable use of our time. And I think industry partners are excited to be working with us now and are thinking about how to bring dollars to those projects.
Well, 'cause I think part of that is they see a future here beyond one person that they might be collaborating with.
Yeah.
You put that kind of investment in an institution, and that person then decides to go somewhere else because it's better for their program, their families, you name it. But then all that investment from industry is now, where does that go? And so I think that's been our conversation with even within ID3A, is that we've got industry folks that now see, K-State values this to the point where we're going to put it in the president's office, and there's now team members across multiple colleges. The optics on that really matters to then having conversations that are more strategic, more longer term, have a vision to it. That's why I'm excited about the Water Institute kind of getting to that level to say, hey, anybody that's connected to water, let's have conversations about this to be more strategic that way.
In the last couple of years, we've had pretty much a full changeover administration on the university.
Yes.
I think that the economic prosperity plan was put in place prior to President Linton coming on board. I'm excited to hear that you're involved in the K-State 105. When I saw those come out and saw the work that was done in developing the pillars of that, the first three are very critical.
Yeah.
But that was the one where I saw the most potential for
Yes.
doing something, even though it was pretty nebulous on what it means.
Yep.
But it's got so much potential. So I'm trying to connect the two thoughts with President Linton coming in and the group that he's brought in with it. Where do you see the shift in the ability to do some of the things that we're talking about here, to see some of the needed changes on this campus?
Absolutely. It's exciting. And, not to say anything poor about any of our prior leadership, because I think it built this really great foundation. But they've brought something different. President Linton, it's almost like the permission to do different. The things that excited us about our work before, interdisciplinary partnerships, these were things that were happening, but sort of the permission to do that is what's really exciting. And I think, that we're living in kind of the nebulous part right now, with titles that we're not quite sure of, programs that are brand new. And I think the real challenge for us right now is to actually maintain that momentum. How do you, the newness and the excitement of having a new president and new strategic plan and all the things that come with it. The challenge is keeping that excitement and momentum going forward and actually then translating it into true cultural change so that 20 years from now, if President Linton would like to retire, maybe, that and whoever comes in next, it's just such an ingrained part of this institution that it's sustained.
I'm assuming, boy, this is going to really reveal my ignorance. I'm one of those people whose head's down too much, but I'm assuming the state of Kansas has a Department of Commerce.
We do.
So how is all of this economic prosperity partnered with, integrated with, ignores? I don't know how does that fit with our state commerce plans for development? And
Sure.
How does that work?
I think we see some overlaps, and maybe they're more topic and project specific. So, and I think right now in a unique place in Kansas, our lieutenant governor is also the secretary of the Department of Commerce. So it kind of also creates this connection of leadership from the State House into what happens on the ground in the Department of Commerce. So a couple things where I've seen some project overlap. So the Department of Commerce helps to manage a team of individuals helping to address broadband and high-speed connectivity throughout the state, which obviously has implications for economic prosperity, agriculture, all the things. So I think that certainly has a tie to digital ag and advanced analytics, project-specific, that then overlaps all four of our pillars from the economic prosperity plan. here recently, the Department of Commerce provided a challenge grant to universities to improve their infrastructure. K-State was a beneficiary of that. So $25 million from Department of Commerce funds then support our Ag Innovation Initiative, the buildings that we're growing for the College of Agriculture. So I think there's sort of this connection of things that help us realize our economic prosperity plan. But from just a pure planning standpoint, they're separate. Economic prosperity plans born from the Board of Regents, which may not be captured directly in a strategic plan for the Department of Commerce.
Would there be benefit for that being coordinated?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Some of the biggest challenges that not just Kansas, the world faces are complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so having entities that maybe brings together not just different expertise, but hopefully different perspectives on how to address the challenges. Oftentimes the first to the table is what people go with, and that's not always the best to have maybe diverse opinions as policies are being considered, but also as programs are being developed, I think is important. And we don't really have that because I'm in plant pathology. There's no way I'm going to work with an entomologist.
No way.
No way.
No, but I think the point is that there needs to be a mechanism that connects these different disciplines to hear. And I think you raised a really important point earlier, and that was integrating social science into the hard sciences.
Yeah.
Because, we have great ideas that are not practical or going to be adopted.
Right.
It's nice to learn that early on so you can kind of change the direction you go. So I think, thank you for the education today.
Thanks. Thank you. I think, too, just kind of starting somewhere, and it may not be perfect. We'll kind of grow and figure this out. This tells you how mature I am, thinking of Dr. Seuss. So Theodore Geisel, who was Dr. Seuss, there was a quote of his that says, sometimes the enormity of the problem is so great, we become incapable of addressing it. And so I think of sometimes you just have to start somewhere. Let's kind of grow and emerge and learn how to do these things differently. If we just step back and think, my goodness, first of all, just creating a whole new system of thinking at a university. Enormity of the problem is too great. Trying to tackle food and ag production in a sustainable way or water resource challenges, all too great to think of. But if we can just, do our thing, make progress one day at a time in doing something different, we can make an impact.
Well, do you have any questions for us?
Well, I think for you, Maureen, now you've had a chance to kind of think back on your career here, and I hope you see that a lot of the things that you started, like you got some of those first groups together thinking about digital ag and how we use technology differently. You've always been doing work in global food systems and everything. I hope you look back on this and see your influence on a lot of these things.
Well, I appreciate that. I was listening to the words coming out of your mouth thinking, all of those words came out of my mouth early on in this because you're heading down a path that is exactly in sync with what I was what I was finding when I got here and started working through. So I appreciate the comment.
Absolutely. It's the long game.
It is the long game.
It is.
We all just have to pick up the ball and keep working it.
It is the long game. Great. Anything else?
I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and understand your water story. I mean, I hear you say water a lot, but now I know.
Do you say it a
lot? now I know why, and I appreciate that.
Thank
but
you.
Also your leadership and there's kind of still trying to figure out your title, but at the same time, I think you're the right leader for that position and to kind of bring water, digital ag, and probably some other things we have yet to kind of determine that are important to us as an institution, as a state, as a region. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
If you have questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at lib.ksu.edu/innovation-lab and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Goins' album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Sunderland Foundation Innovation Lab at Kansas State University.